Hello, everyone, and welcome to The Way with Maps. I'm your host, Maps, and today I am joined by my buddy, my bro, Marcelo from my hometown. Marcelo, say hello.
Hi, everybody. Nice to be here.
Today we're going to be talking about Puerto Rican statehood versus Puerto Rican independence. Just kind of like as a preface, I guess. Like, we are really just like talking back and forth here. There's no, we don't really have any, organized bullets today. We're just kind of going off the cuff. So, I mean, this should be fun because I feel like this topic in particular is, pretty relevant to, not just us, but, I feel like, I don't know, to some of my, friends here that don't really know. Have you ever had that? Have you had that experience?
Yeah, no, for sure. I've had to explain a lot of politics to a lot of people, and, I'm not a politics guy. It's been a good time, though. I feel like it's something to appreciate, talking about so many things that you don't normally talk about. It's pretty dope.
Right. I kind of want to start with just a general foundation, because I feel like the statehood versus independence argument is just two sides to the same coin, and it's ultimately both, I think, independence advocates and statehood advocates. Both of them want the same thing, and that's just what's best for Puerto Rico. I think that
100% agree.
Yeah, it's just some people think it's based on some people think it's we want the same things, but the independence advocates go one route of getting that thing, and statehood advocates go another route. And I think that's important before we start talking about the pros and cons. It's important to establish the foundation.
Yeah.
So just for a little background information, Puerto Rico was sorry if there's a little background noise. There's another group recording in the other studio next door. But so Puerto Rico was invaded by the United States in 1898.
Yes.
Correct me if this is Puerto Rican history, 7th grade.
From top of the head, yeah, don't worry. But yeah, you're right. That's
in 1898, and basically what ended up happening. So before that, though, there's a lot of history with the Spanish. Yeah. And I think everyone can agree that colonialism was not a good thing, obviously, and it was bad. Puerto Rico had a pretty poor relationship with the Spanish, and they tried to achieve independence multiple times?
Yeah. So it was multiple times, but they were pretty weak,
militarily
insurgencies of revolution, but they were really just it was weak attempts. There was only one notable one, and it got shut down pretty quickly.
Yeah. And we tried to, a big, part of the whole idea was also not just Puerto Rico achieving independence in and of itself, but also with other Caribbean countries. Cuba was a big one.
Yeah, we took inspiration a lot from I mean Puerto Rico, not obviously us, but Puerto Rico took a lot of inspiration, or at least those revolutionaries, from the Latin American revolutions going on at the same time, and that's also why there's a lot of similarities in objects like flags and things like that in Puerto Rico and related to the independence groups, because they took all this advice and kind of knowledge from all the other successful independence movements.
Right. And basically, that's, like you said, that's why Cuba and Puerto Rico have the same flag, different colors. But before that, it was a larger idea. Essentially, though, what ended up happening was that towards the end of the 19th century, Cuba and Puerto Rico were still attempting independence, and eventually the United States I don't want to say they began the Spanish-American War. There's a lot of controversy with what happened there, if who initiated first.
Pretty big gray area.
Yeah. Apparently, what happened was that basically there was an American ship that was sunk.
It was docked in Cuba.
Yeah, it was docked in Cuba, but it didn't sink. It did explode. Something happened.
Something happened. I'm pretty sure it exploded, and there was no direct culprit. And there's a lot of conspiracies that the U.S. exploded it themselves, sort of to they wanted
to provoke war.
Exactly,
because
as an instigator.
At this time, it's important to understand context. I feel to a lot of our I have conflict about this, because when I'm for like statehood. So I say a lot like we in terms of like the United States and Puerto Rico, because I think Puerto Rico should be included in the conversation just because of the position we're in now and what I wish the position would be, which is statehood. Some people don't, but I also say we as in us Puerto Ricans because culturally we're so different.
Yeah.
So
no, it's a challenge definitely when you're talking with people, having to make sure that you're aware of their understanding as well. Yeah, I agree. Just to clarify as well, I'm more inclined towards the independent side. So most of the time I'll be saying we, it's as in the Puerto Ricans.
Yeah, I'll be doing both, and I'll try to keep it clear and concise. But yeah, like just a few examples here of like just like. Okay, I don't want to like repeat myself, but for example, Marcelo and I come from literally the same hometown in Puerto Rico. Like our schools were like rival high schools. We were like really.
I lived 10 minutes away from him.
Yeah, probably like 5 to 10 minutes away from me, and we both came to Notre Dame with like very different, because even I feel like even like Americans, and when I say Americans I mean like I'm gonna say continentals for like people.
That's fair. Yeah, mainlanders.
So like mainlanders, yeah, even they, especially like not especially here at Notre Dame, but even here at Notre Dame, like the administration, they like aren't exactly sure. I remember calling in a couple times and asking if I had to come for international orientation, which you did, right?
No, I didn't actually.
Oh, didn't you not come in early?
No, they invited a certain pool of students, and I did regular decisions, so I was not on the priority.
Okay,
but unfortunately.
So, but for like, when did you moved in before I did? I mean,
So yeah, no, I did come in. Oh, orientation.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I thought you meant the weekend. There's like a student.
Yeah,
weekend.
I know. I didn't come.
No,
for
yeah, I did come for international orientation, and yeah, so the university has, it's Puerto Rico's kind of like the exception to all their rules, in the sense that mainlanders pay, or not necessarily. We'll get to that in a second. Actually, I want to make a statement about that, but people from the U.S. are obviously not international, and Puerto Ricans have U.S. citizenship, and technically they should be considered from the U.S. as well, but just because of the difference of our culture, the university considers Puerto Ricans as internationals.
Right. I feel like there's a lot of political stuff behind there too. There was a lot of stuff that went on with the first Puerto Rican governor of Puerto Rico, because it should be known that once the United States invaded Puerto Rico, they put in place a military government in the meantime, and then it turned into like a regular government, but they put in American.
Yeah, they were
governors.
Selected officials by the president. Yeah, and it wasn't until 1952.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
I'm pretty sure 1952 with the establishment of the Associated Free State, which is sort of the system of government. It's kind of like the Constitution of Puerto Rico.
Yeah, basically our Constitution was modeled after the United States Constitution. The whole Associated Free State thing came from our first Puerto Rican governor, who put in place that system of government. And some people have opinions and say that he's the person that like is responsible for a lot of the issues Puerto Rico has today, but he's also responsible for getting
for a lot of progress.
Yeah, for a lot of progress.
That's where arguments begin, is when kind of the U.S. started giving us a little more, us as in the Puerto Ricans, a little more freedom in our political choices, and he was the first leader when we had this freedom. Right. So yeah, no, definitely I'd say he had more progress than he incited more progress than what he avoided. Opposite of progress.
Right. Yeah. Anyways, just to finish my previous statement before we continue on this track of thought, because this is particularly interesting. But so yeah, Marcelo came in for international student orientation, and I didn't, because when I called in, they said like, oh well, you don't have to if you've if you're it's weird.
Yeah.
It's a very gray area. It's just basically like, I guess this is like, we're in a unique position where we can kind of choose if we're international or not, because I've spoken to a lot of my friends here too, and when I told them we have our own national anthem, and they're like, oh wait, what? But you're like, how are you so like pro US if you have your own national anthem and you're like your own political or like national identity? I think it ultimately comes down to like, that's why I use the word a lot, like nations, because Puerto Rico is its own nation, as in it's got its own culture, background, and it's very different from people on like the continental U.S., but it's like politically tied with the United States, so it's not its own country because it's owned by, which could also stirs conflict sometimes, because again, like when most Puerto Ricans refer to my country, they're referring to like Puerto Rico itself, and we're particularly talking about too, I guess most of our experience involves Puerto Ricans people that live in Puerto Rico. I know there's like a whole
there's a very large population that lives outside, but we're fresh on the mainland, so we still haven't had much experience with them. But there's actually I met multiple people who grew up, born and raised in the mainland, whose parents are Puerto Rican, and they talk to me in choppy Spanish with strong American accents, but they still do understand a lot of the culture as they were raised in it, just not they were raised in it, not surrounded by it.
We're not taking away the identity of those people. We're just saying that, like, for like purposes of our like conversation here, this is just what we're not used to talking to people like Puerto Ricans and the U.S. because we've lived in Puerto Rico our entire lives.
Exactly.
So, but yeah, like Puerto Ricans born in the U.S. are still Puerto Ricans, and I think actually Puerto Rico is a really welcoming, like culturally, like
I agree 100%. I feel like every time, at least in my situations, when we meet, okay, I'd like to clarify, there are clear boundaries when you meet people from outside countries, when they, like, let's say they move to Puerto Rico.
Right.
We welcome them, honestly. The culture is a welcoming culture. I feel like it's there's a lot of nice, it's very positive. It's very positive attitude towards new experiences and just people in general. But also I'd say it's very clear the differences between people. Like, we still acknowledge differences, we're just kind of accept them.
Right. I also think that's like identity-wise, Puerto Rico, and this is like why, I don't know how your experience has been, but at least mine, and I've had this before, like this isn't my first time in the U.S., like I've done like a lot of summer programs, and I've been in for extended periods of time in the U.S. before, but like the whole racial dynamic that plays out in the continental United States is very new to me. Yeah. Because back home, everyone's considered Puerto Rican. You can have literally the entire rainbow of skin colors.
You can look how you look. Everyone is seen as Puerto Rican.
Yeah, you could even be like, so I have like, for example, a friend, shout out Nicolas. He's from my high school, and his parents are both Argentinian, and they moved. Or Argentine, I don't know what's the right way. So they both moved to Puerto Rico, and my buddy, he lived in Puerto Rico his entire life. I've known him for like over 10 years. And he's considered both Puerto Rican and Argentine, but he's like, we don't have this, like, it's a weird dynamic to me that in the U.S. it's kind of odd how you're almost held to one identity. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Or like, not like, that's kind of subjective. I guess it also depends a lot on where you live. But like, I feel like I have a hard time, and I feel like we as Puerto Ricans have a hard time kind of knowing where we stand in the whole identity.
Exactly.
Like,
deciding our I agree 100%. I feel like that issue only arises the whole what do I classify as, like when I was self-identifying myself as a kid for, say, the PSAT,
right,
or something like that. Like, for example, when there's questions of race, it's just things that never really crossed my mind. So I'm given a 5-6 choice list where none of them apply to me, and it's a question of what do I do. I feel like it's really interesting though, because now that I'm living in the society that made this very 5 option list, it's interesting because you see. It's also unfortunate, but you see the divisions amongst the people. They associate more with themselves and all that, but it is subjective.
Yeah,
obviously.
I think there's also a part, and we'll get to more on like campus culture, and culture, like you said, like there are divisions in the group, but also like we're not saying, like, Notre Dame's obviously very welcoming. Yes. It's just the communities in and of themselves sometimes, and exactly. I think it's like, here's what I think. Because I know I have, and we've spoken about this before. I have a particular, like, idea of like the Latino community in Notre Dame.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to state a couple things. Number one is that the international Latino community versus the like American Latino community is definitely distinguished. Like they're two different, entirely different people. And Puerto Ricans lie in that international community.
Yes, but I have seen
here at least
that it's not uncommon as well for Puerto Ricans to just associate themselves with people from the mainland.
Right.
And it seems a lot easier for Puerto Rican students than actual international students.
Yeah. Because we're so Americanized almost.
Exactly.
Like it's weird because we shared both cultures, that very international own identity, but also that American culture, as in we're a part of the we're a part of the United States. So excuse me. So yeah, that's the first thing I wanted to address. The second thing is that I've had experiences where it's difficult to, for example, if like the Latinos are having like a social gathering, they're not exactly entirely, and I think this is more so the international community, they're not exactly entirely welcoming to. It's not like people of other races. It's more so like Americans. As in fair. Continental, that's U.S. fair. People.
I have noticed it, and I'd say that's my number one critique. It's become like a pretty exclusive community in itself.
Yeah, it's kind of like I don't want to say it's anti-American, but it's like definitely more so geared against. But I don't think it's like, this is the thing. I don't think it's hostile.
No, and I don't think it's inspired by any sort of hatred.
Yeah,
I feel
because
like
everyone I've spoken to says, "Oh yeah, that sucks." Like it's awful that the community is that way.
They just accept it as it is.
Yeah, I think it's either like higher ups, whoever the higher ups are in the community, and I'm not talking in reference to like. The administration or faculty. That's not what I mean at all. I'm talking more so like the students among themselves.
Yeah.
But I think ultimately it comes down to the fact that I think it's like a defense mechanism, and I don't know what previous Latino and or Hispanic generations have experienced here at Notre Dame. I think it's been relatively peaceful. I have also heard there's obviously occasional instances, like not that they exist or they have existed, and what I think is that just especially the international community, they're like trying to protect themselves from that. They're just doing it in the worst way possible, which is blocking themselves out from the entire the rest of the community. Which I think it should be the opposite, especially if you want people to welcome your culture and welcome you as an individual. You have to extend that same favor to other people. But that's just something that I've seen. Anyways, I want to get back to
the Puerto Rico.
Yes, big tangents in this episode. But yeah, I want to get back to we were talking about our first governor and what happened after. Essentially, once they started giving us more freedom, a large population of Puerto Ricans at the time, I feel like, were very supportive of, I don't want to say a large, I don't really have the statistics, but there was definitely, let's just call it a significant group of individuals that were for independence from the United States. And this idea also comes from the fact that we were trying to achieve independence from Spain, but also that Puerto Rico in its entire history, at least post Columbus, has never been sovereign, has never been able to completely and wholly govern over itself. So what ended up happening was that there was a lot of American backlash, as in continental backlash. A lot of people, or the government, the United States government at the time, and I guess this has a lot probably to do with the Cold War too, because at this time the United States was, I believe Cuba was a communist, had its communist revolution, and it was having I feel like the U.S. had enough problems on its plate, and this happened with the entire you cross the line below the U.S.-Mexico border, and you color in all the countries below that line, and the U.S. probably had the U.S. government was probably influencing all the governments of all those countries.
Definitely, there was definitely foreign influence, especially throughout those times, and also I think it's important that we note that 4 years before we elected the first governor, the U.S. actually passed a law where any ideas spread of independence, that's a crime punishable by jail time.
Right.
I think it's referred to as the gag law, I'm pretty sure. La ley de mordaza in Spanish. And it's a very interesting fact, because the U.S. at one point right before giving the Puerto Rican peoples their right to elect their own governor, they were also silenced. And I think that's really interesting as well.
Yeah, I think it also it played into like a larger thing, but again, because we're talking about Puerto Rico in this episode, we're going to focus on its effects on Puerto Rico.
Yeah.
So there were a lot of, let's just say, bad things, for lack of a better word, that the United States did to Puerto Rico during this time, and a lot of it involved, like Marcelo said, censorship, which is, it's kind of crazy because like at least my ideals of like the United States and democracy go entirely against what happened during this period. And that's why I feel like there's probably still some sort of bitter taste in people's mouths when and not just in Puerto Rico but in all the South American countries as well, when they reference the American government, because of what happened back then. I don't think it's representative of what, at least it's definitely not representative of what the United States kind of like the idea of them.
And especially what it is now. They're very different than or at least their treatment of the island's government is very different now as what it was.
I feel like they've adapted a more so neutral stance just because they saw what a problem it was. And I think, I mean, it's no secret that the United States put in place a lot of internationally speaking, especially in South America, put in place a lot of dictatorships and supported even authoritarian regimes, just so the countries would not become communist.
Yes, and I think also for personal gain. Right. For example, like Panama, with the building of the canal.
Of the canal, yeah. So there was definitely this censorship in Puerto Rico, and there was a very important issue in Spanish. It's called La Masacre de Ponce.
Yes.
In English, it's the Ponce Massacre, where I believe Puerto Ricans were having a peaceful protest.
Yes.
In Ponce, which is one of the
larger municipalities.
Yeah, municipalities in the south, and they were having a protest, and the United States. I don't know if it was a branch of the military, something.
I believe it was
National Guard. I
think it was just a little bit higher than the normal police force.
Right.
Yeah. But it was government funded.
Yeah, it was a government agency. It wasn't just a random group of protesters or anti-protesters.
Exactly.
So Puerto Ricans were having their protests, and the United States government cracked down on that. And I don't know how many people died, but it was
more than one. It's a significant. It's off the top of my head, but I'm pretty sure it was around 22 or 18. I can't remember correctly, but no, yeah, definitely. And that was that event really stuck with people. There's a saying that goes, "The axe forgets what the tree remembers," and I feel like it's exemplified there. A lot of people kind of throw it under the rug, but those who are in direct relation to this event remember it very vividly. A lot of people got hurt.
Right. So I did a quick Google search. Apparently it says it was a peaceful civilian march turned into a police shooting in which 19 civilians and 2 policemen were killed. More than 200 civilians were wounded, and most of the dead were reportedly shot in their backs. So it was definitely this was seen as a very hostile, aggressive, the United States is trying to shut us down. And I feel like the reason why I feel like it's important to put these ideas out is because this kind of, hopefully it helps people understand the context behind the Puerto Rican-U.S. relations history, and it explains almost the context behind what's happening now.
Yeah.
So this is a very big thing that happened. Another big thing that happened was during Korea and Vietnam. A lot of Puerto Rican soldiers were sent to Vietnamese or Korean front lines, and it is understood, again, we don't know the validity of this, but this is stuff that we also get, we have a very different, that's why I think we have a very third party point of view on the world, because we belong to the United States, but we're also not entirely a state. So we see the United States in the light that we are them, but also
we get a very close view of seeing them as someone else.
Yeah, we also understand they've done it's things have happened to Puerto Rico and its people that have like we understand the two sides of the coin almost. And so reportedly, like they would send people to like the front lines, and a very big excuse that was given was that like Puerto Rico was very similar in climate to Vietnam and Korea, and so they would send in people, and they'd like they would use that as a way of justifying
And it's also interesting because when the United States gave Puerto Ricans the citizenship, it was almost as like a silencer to the outcries that were happening. So I looked it up, and they gained their citizenship in 1917, which happens to be during the First World War, a war where a lot of material and resources were used in funding it, and Puerto Ricans were drafted to this war.
Yeah, a lot of Puerto Ricans were conscripted into the military, and again, like Marcelo said, it at least it felt that way because it was like almost like they're trying to just justify putting us in the war, and yeah, like that's just like a big chunk of history was like Puerto Rican involvement in war. There were also two. So Puerto Rico is like a big island. It's got little islands that are still a part of it. They call it the Puerto Rican archipelago, but it's like we're not really that big of an archipelago. It's just like a big island with small islands around it. Two of them particularly that are like inhabited to this day still.
Yes, and so just brief explanation. When we refer to areas in Puerto Rico as municipalities, it's kind of like very small counties.
Right.
That have their own, they have a government building with government representatives for that county.
Yeah. But just to be clear, there's 78. 78, which is, again, a lot of people are going to be like, that's absurd because
it is.
It is. Like the U.S. has 50 states. No, it's absurd. It's definitely crazy. It's insane.
This is an island that's 100 by 35 nautical miles, I think it is. It's absurd. It's absurd.
Yeah. It's got like 78 municipalities, and each one of them has a mayor, and like a whole
government building funded with a lot of employees.
Which is why like there's a lot to say also about corruption in the Puerto Rican government.
Yes, and also just poor organization of how it's run.
Poor logistics. Yeah.
But yeah, back to Vieques and Culebra.
Right. So Vieques and Culebra are the name of the two municipalities. They're two municipalities, but they're also two islands that are part of the Puerto Rican archipelago.
Yes.
And so each island has its own municipality. The larger one's Vieques, the small one's Culebra. But so during like for war preparation, the United States would train, I think, soldiers there.
Yeah, this was for World War II.
Right.
If I'm not mistaken. They acquired almost half of the island of Vieques specifically. They did have a base in the other island of Culebra, but almost half of the island of Vieques, they acquired it, and they relocated all the citizens that were on this portion of the island to the center and established a base camp in that area, where they would conduct not only training and testing for any different war climates or anything like that, but they would also test artillery on the land. And a lot of it resulted in a lot of protesting from the islanders because the artillery would physically shake the entire island. Right.
There were like in particular, there's a very famous site in Culebra where there's a tank on one of the beaches still to this day. In Vieques, they did a lot of like bombing runs, like to practice like target practice with planes. So that's something that like also there's a lot of debate up to whether or not some of the Puerto Ricans like in the area, obviously some were upset. Some were probably not. I say probably because I just don't have all the facts. It's like blurry. There's a lot of facts that
also, are blurry. A lot of the history of Puerto Rico is blurry because since it was such an underdeveloped area at the time, especially when a lot of these significant moments were happening, it was poorly recorded. And to look back on it now, we all have to understand and kind of put a filter on what we look at, that this could be not necessarily entirely true, or this could be not necessarily entirely the whole truth.
Right. So, like, yeah, there's definitely a lot of, and obviously the United States at the time did its best to hide all this stuff.
Yeah.
Like, it's the United States is, or has, I feel like, tried to be the moral center of the world and kind of like the epitome of the democracy, like a pillar of like inspiration for so many countries. This is not something they would want to get out. This is something that will probably shock a lot of listeners that are like continental listeners, and just people that don't really know this side of the United States.
Yeah,
and obviously,
definitely.
I mean, like it's very different to like the concept of what we understand the United States to be. So, I want to talk about a little bit about like our like some big figures that were like draw some comparisons and contrasts with like big figures in the independence movement. So there was, like Marcelo said, the United States would jail people who like protested or were for independence and like express any sort of like support
or spread of the ideals.
And this actually did happen in multiple occasions.
Yes.
God, a lot of people, like a lot of Puerto Ricans, are probably gonna be very like disappointed in me for not knowing the names of a lot of these. But
one of them was freed, I believe, 2 years ago. Oscar. Wow.
Yeah.
I believe it's Lopez.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
not
me
entirely
too.
sure. But no, yeah, there's a lot of important people who were jailed, and although some of them were jailed reasonably because they began to become hostile with their attempts of spreading the ideas, there were also many who simply would speak out against the U.S. and simply for this they were locked up for a large portion of their lives. Sorry.
yeah, okay. So I have the stats here. I just pulled it up. Sorry for all the Puerto Ricans that like are ashamed of me now. No, but so yeah, Oscar Lopez Rivera. So he was born in January 6th, 1943. He's a Puerto Rican activist and militant who was a member and suspected leader of the Fuerzas Armadas de Liberación Nacional Puertorriqueña, which is basically like a Puerto Rican nationalist party.
Yeah. At the time.
At the time, right. And so he was giving 55 years, extended 15 years later for conspiracy to escape. So that's 80 years in prison. Or I think it's, I don't know if the 15 are like added into the 55. Either way, it's a lot of years for imprisonment for basically just censorship.
Yeah.
It was to quiet this dude up. And so like a lot of these cases, he's still alive, by the way, but a lot of
and he was liberated under Obama's
administration.
Administration.
So there's a lot of like these examples. There was another one who I totally forgot this dude's name, but it was suspected that also the United States would, like the U.S. government would test with like or torture these people like with chemicals.
The military draftees, is that what?
No, the prisoners.
Oh, okay.
So there's like that's another like conspiracy where it's like, well, did like United States? It's thought that the United States, like they released some pictures of some of the prisoners. I think it was.
Okay.
And their legs. This dude was like super influential. I hate that I forgot his name, but his legs are like swollen, and it looks like a big theory was that they were testing nuclear like radiation on this man. So there were a lot of like shady things like that influence a lot of like persuade public opinion too. And like Marcelo said, like Oscar Lopez, he only got out of jail a few years ago.
Yeah.
Like this dude was in prison for a long time. For a long time. Well, Obama got him out, and he was like
2 years
basically,
ago,
yeah,
or 3. Well, yeah, almost 4 because it's almost 20.
Yeah, he was our last president. So it's been a long time, and like this was frequent, and it happened with like a lot more people. Another significant like person was Lolita Lebron.
Yes,
and
I feel like she was rightfully jailed. She took it. This is off the top of my head. Javier's finding the exact details in a second, but I believe, or what I remember, is that she bombed the House of Representatives.
I think she shot Congress.
And shot up Congress.
I don't know if she shot
I don't think
like,
she
Congress
killed
members.
anyone,
She just
but
shot.
she did release, discharge the weapon.
Discharged
Yeah.
weapons in the room.
Yeah,
Which-
as an act of protest,
Yeah.
which, I mean,
No
it
one's
does
justifying
warrant an
that.
arrest.
No one's
Yeah.
justifying that. But it's also important to note that this woman is buried in our national cemetery in San Juan.
And she is regarded
As a national hero.
As a national hero and a very important figure in the development of Puerto Rico's history.
She was convicted of attempted murder and other crimes, leading an assault on the U.S. House of Representatives in 1954, resulting in the wounding of 5 members of the United States Congress. So I guess she did shoot people.
Wow.
Which, again, no one's justifying
Yes.
that. That's obviously
And
very radical.
That should not be why. It's not because of this that she is a national hero. It's
Yeah.
because of everything that she had done prior to
Right.
this.
Exactly.
And her influence, because she became a very influential woman in the independence movement, and a lot of people understood that and gave her credit. And I feel it's very impressive that even though you commit something so hostile, you still maintain all this credit.
That
Among your
just
people.
speaks to, that was like a, I guess, a dark, like the darkest thing that we could have brought up. But like that's just a big, like she's very famous for that
Yeah,
too.
she is.
But that's like the dark, like the darker side of her history. She was, I guess, the fact that she's still referred to as an and the fact that we still hold her up to the national hero position just goes to show how powerful everything she did, like aside from this.
No, everything that led up
Right.
to that moment.
And it should also be known that Puerto Rican independence movements today are not like this. Like
No,
they're
definitely.
not.
They're a well-established political party, which, although right now their numbers don't compare to the bipartisan options of Puerto Rico, they're a significant. People talk about them because their voters could make the difference in any election that has been held.
Right. So I looked this up earlier, and so we're kind of wrapping up the history portion. We're
Yeah.
basically getting. I already spoke about Vietnam and Korea. We're basically getting into the 2000s, 1990s. But essentially, so Puerto Rico, I kind of want to explain a little bit about our government and how it works. Essentially, we have a governor who's seen as like the highest authority in the land. There's a lot to speak about political corruption in the system, and also the actual power that this governor has, and not just
Especially in recent years.
right, especially in recent years, and not just the power that this governor has, but also the power that the Puerto Rican government has. And essentially, we have a Senate, and we have our own Congress and House of Representatives and all that. We have that. It's modeled after the U.S. model. So there's a couple political parties. Essentially, some of them are for statehood. Others are for maintaining the status quo, which is like what we are now.
Yes.
Which is an associated free state.
Yeah.
And so we do have an independence party.
Yes.
So like Marcelo said, the independence party is a very small percentage. I believe in our last
election, I think it was
5%
8% or 7%.
Oh yeah,
I'm not sure.
I know.
It's not a significant number.
Right. It's definitely less than 10. I looked up 5, but again, I don't remember what election. Like I know it was one of the recent ones, but I don't know if it was because we've done regular elections. The problem is that we're gonna get into the whole corruption of Puerto Rico, so of the Puerto Rican government. So a big part of it is So a big part of it has to do with a lot that, for one, Puerto Rico's never seen anything other than, having an overlord at all times.
Yeah.
It was first Spain and then the United States. So
Yes.
a lot of people say that we've had this this colonial mentality.
Yeah, and a lot of people would argue that by definition, Puerto Rico is currently still a colony.
Right.
Yeah.
A lot of people do say that. And I mean, I guess again, that's very subject to opinions.
Yes, and it's more also what specific factors do you prioritize? And I think that's where a lot of people's political choices arrive to, right? So the political parties, there's 3 primary ones. There's the new Partido Nuevo Progresista, which
it's just called the PNP.
Yeah, the PNP, which is the statehood. It's progressive. the
New
PNP.
Progressive Party, I think.
Exactly. There's the PPD, which is the status quo kind of
Party.
maintain how we are
Partido
party.
Popular Democrático.
Yes. And then there's the PIP, which is the Puerto Rican Independence Party. That one translates nicely.
That one's good.
And those are the three primary ones. But it's also important to note that there are, I believe it's 4 other established
There's a lot.
ones.
And especially there's a new one that's kind of seen as pretty relevant, but I don't like this party at all.
Is it the Movimiento Victoria?
Yeah, it's basically, in my opinion, what ended up happening was that the last election, so there's a lot of stuff that happened with our governor this year. Our ex-governor now, and we've had 2 more since then, and our current governor is I can't remember her name.
Wanda Vázquez.
Yeah, there it is. Yeah, so she was part of the part of the board of the first
of the elected
administration. Yeah.
2016 election.
So Ricky Rosselló, he was like the first elected, but he had like a really big corruption scandal. There was like massive protests. There's a long story behind this, but
in July of this year.
Yeah, but there's like a whole system where the next in line, 3 of the next people in line for the governor all resigned, and then the next dude was too young to be governor, and so they just kept going down the line, and essentially another member of the same party, which is Pedro Pierluisi,
he just kind of stepped up.
He stepped up to I think it was the Senate, or God, dude, I can't remember. Somebody put him in power. I know it wasn't just he wasn't. It wasn't like a.
He didn't call himself the governor.
It wasn't a power grab. He was put in power by one of the institutions, but then he stepped down after Wanda Vázquez stepped up because she was supposedly the correct.
Well, yeah, and also it was most importantly because the current governor, as he was giving his resignment speech, he put in place Wanda Vázquez as his substitute.
Right.
Until they could elect a new leader. And that's why a lot of people, because it's also, this was a very packed 3 weeks of politics, I'd say. Because the new governor, or the temporary governor, Pedro Pierluisi, he was it was already being rumored who was going to take his place, because it started to become common knowledge that this governor was most likely going to resign. Right. And so it was him who called her into place, but he was an
interim governor. Pedro Pierluisi was an interim governor. Yeah. He was basically there until someone could step up.
Yeah, which I believe took 9 days.
Yeah, it wasn't. So we had within I think 2 weeks we had 3 governors. It was insane.
It was quite the week, especially for the news sources on the island.
But basically, so the PNP was the party that is in power in this electoral term. Yeah, it's the current party that's in power now. And what I believe the new party is basically everyone that lost the last election got together and made a party. That's how I see it.
That's fair. I mean, it's a fair view. I'd see it more as so the Puerto Rico tried when parties were being created to model themselves after the bipartisan system that the U.S. has. Right. Which, honestly, I feel obviously this isn't something that they would have known, but I personally feel that was a mistake. Right. And last election, there were certain people running who were just running independent from any party. And I feel that, although they could have been good candidates or not, just automatically discourages you as a candidate. Right. And I feel that's why the Movimiento Victoria was made. It was to give these people sort of a backing, more so they could sort of give a little more comfort to the citizens, so they could have a party to blame as well.
I mean, this is what I think is probably going to end up happening again. This depends, but that's true what you're saying. And also, I mean, even in the continental United States, a lot of people have very strong opinions about bipartisan systems. Yes. And everyone thinks, or at least not everyone, but a lot of people do seem to argue that having a third party or more than 2 parties in the United States would be a good thing. And the same thing kind of happens in Puerto Rico. That's just everywhere. But also, Puerto Rico is different because it has multiple choices. The United States is divided into conservatives and liberals. And liberals. Yeah, sorry, I got Puerto Rico and the U.S. mixed up. And so, that's the U.S. And so Puerto Rico has obviously for statehood, just staying the same or or independence.
And all of its variants, because a lot of people who, and this is a reason why the Independence Party doesn't have that much popularity statistically, it's because the values the Independence Party pushes are not those that are in agreement with most of the people who actually are for independence. They feel like although there is an Independence Party, there's no party that represents them.
Right.
That's where I believe also the Movimiento Victoria also stems from, because it's trying to give a more general voice to these people.
Right. Also, just to split into demographics, generally speaking, I think a lot of younger people are more so towards independence and like
or status
quo, and a lot of like the older generations. But again, it depends, because I'm for statehood.
Yeah.
But a lot of the older generations also are for statehood, and I think as people get older, a lot of them tend to like fluctuate towards statehood.
Yes.
Again, like that's just a demographics outlook. I personally don't think that like this new party is gonna like get elected, just because people, I mean, I think this is a very big aspect of like Puerto Rico too, is that a lot of people aren't too keen on changing things. This goes for the world in general.
That's
people
just
are
humans.
Yeah, people are just reluctant for change.
Exactly.
But
especially such mass change.
Right. In Puerto Rico in particular, there's like, I don't know, like there's this like weird stagnant government, like the government just seems like such a slow, like sluggish, like just like not a fluid like institution or organization. And also, I mean, this is just me, but at the end of the day, I think it doesn't matter, because whatever the Puerto Rican party gets elected, whatever they want to do, they can't do it unless the U.S. approves it.
Exactly.
So ultimately,
and it's just extremely slowed process. And even if parties, let's imagine a perfect party that gets elected and they have these great ideas that they want to pass, but they have a lot and they got to do it quick. They simply can't. It's not possible for rapid change to happen with what's been put in place by the U.S.
I mean, everything needs to like be like I guess like so the Puerto Rican like decisions, like everything has to be approved by the U.S. And kind of like like I said, the government is like very like slow, and it's seen as like not very powerful. There's also a lot to speak about, like corruption within like Puerto Rico and like previous governors and like all that sort of stuff. But and like for example, like this like our governor, the one that was elected for this past election, got into like a really big scandal.
Yeah, but, and I feel like that for that specific scandal, this upcoming 2020 election is going to be very interesting, because I feel like for the first time, I genuinely do believe that most likely what's going to happen is either the PNP or the PPD.
Winning. Yeah, the red party. So the PNP is the blue party. The red party is the PPD, and then the PIP is green. Yeah. So PIP is independent.
If you're asking me for my personal opinion, I think red's going to win.
Yeah, I think red's going to win too.
And that's just because of all the problems.
But because also like the blue party, so the PNP is like basically obliterated. Like just their credibility is gone.
Yeah. But that's a lot of voters that are in the blue party that are searching for. And so you have the red party and movements such as the Movimiento Victoria, which is what we were talking about, this upcoming new movement, that they're just trying to scavenge these confused and lost
I mean,
supporters.
to be fair, the blue might win again this year just because they have such a strong voter base, and they also have a good candidate, in my opinion. Pedro Pierluisi is the candidate that's running for the blue party.
Yeah, that's fair.
But I do think it's going to probably be the red party.
Yeah. But I think it's going to be close. It's going to be an interesting election.
We'll see.
I feel.
Yeah. And again, there's also a new voter base coming in, like with the young people. So we'll see. Independents, like we said, it's less than 10%. So they're not going to get the vote. And they probably won't, just because of what Marcelo said. There's not really a foundation there. There's a lot of arguments which we haven't gotten to, surprisingly, and we're basically 12 minutes away from ending the show. Yeah. But like
we could jump to them if you want.
Yeah. The Puerto Rico, like the actual statehood versus independence arguments, like. For example, if Puerto Rico were to go independent, like 80% of its produce is imported from the United States. Like we have no like branch of the military. It's all like America.
Oh, we've become a figurative leech.
Yeah, no, for sure. And it's not just that, but it's more so like we've become very dependent on the United States. Because we don't really, like, a leech implies, I feel like we get something out of them. I don't, like, we do get like national security and I guess like supervision of government, like, supervision from the United, like, federal supervision and all
advising.
This stuff. Yeah, but
we don't get much in return. I do understand. I feel like leech is a strong word.
Right.
That's fair. Maybe a better characterization would be like, let's say you adopted a child and you didn't really raise him.
I just see Puerto Rico as the United States dog.
That's fair. That's good. That's actually
because they own us. They take care of us.
They're very controlling as well.
Yeah,
and that like it's seen as okay.
Yeah,
because I mean, think about it. You control your dog. That's okay. You put him on a leash. You walk him around.
But there's definitely like a lot of arguments like that. Also, like, Puerto Rico has like just like it's losing, its population is declining, the economy is very stagnant. Like, we wouldn't be able to survive on our own, I think. And
at the moment,
right. So I feel like I want to get into that. So I feel like you and other people that are leaning more towards independence are very keen on like the future being different from what it is now. Like,
yes, most of what the ideals, I'd say the ideal island that I feel like could be reached rides a lot on a lot of people being in accordance with each other,
which is very difficult.
Which is extremely difficult. I agree. But say if the Independence Party had the population of the PNP, the blue side.
Right.
Let's suppose that, and then independence leaders began getting elected. I don't feel as if what they would be trying to push for as soon as they get elected is actually independence. I feel like everyone acknowledges that it is not a possibility right now.
So they would probably try to, we assume, because these people have never been in power, really.
Yeah, they haven't, and I think it's. The reasons why I feel it's founded in it's possible. I feel like it's possible is because every year presidents have spoken out, with the exception from 2016 to now. Every year presidents have spoken out about Puerto Rico. They're always very inclined to say, when the island makes up its mind, we will do everything in our power to give them what they want. But that was also explicitly said, obviously not word for word, but by Obama in I believe 2011.
I think a lot of presidents have had that stance. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think even Donald Trump, which Puerto Ricans are not a big fan of, for reasons, but for many reasons. For people curious, he's just not been very respectful to like Puerto Rico and their people, especially with the whole Hurricane Maria thing. He wasn't,
and he's shown a lot of ignorance, which the Puerto Rican people did not like at all.
So but essentially, like the U.S. has been very keen on like whatever Puerto Rico wants, and whenever it makes up its mind, we'll give it whatever. Another big argument I think for statehood is that evidently Puerto Rico is very corrupt, and it's not. I don't think it's currently capable of governing itself.
Yeah, that's that. I don't understand that point, and I admit to it to be true. There's so many decisions that were made such a long time ago that have created sort of this cesspool of corruption, and I'm pretty sure I'm quoting that from someone, I can't remember who, but those are not my words. But it's created a situation, and that it's extremely hard to rapidly get out of that, right? So there's not going to be any instant change, and I don't think it's possible, just because of how bad we've gone to an extreme of bad. That it's a challenge to make a possibility of getting out in the first place. So ultimately, like. So your view of independence, correct me if I'm wrong, is basically we have to get the island in position to where it can govern itself. Yes.
Okay. And so we're going to be getting into hypotheticals now, but before that, I just want to say that basically, like I said, independence status quo, maybe not status quo, because status quo like wants to keep things the same, but definitely like statehood and independence advocates. I'm not talking about political parties aside, because there's a lot of also controversy on like a lot of people just support political parties for the fact that they're for statehood or for status quo,
just for the ideals or the general ideas
just for
of the party.
just for the goal that they have, not exactly for the party themselves. I feel like that's very like probably true. The same,
and that's problematic. That's problematic, and it happens similarly in the U.S.
Yeah, that's what I was about to say. I feel like it's the same here, where people like just more like liberals have no one else to support but the Democratic Party if they want liberal ideals to be instilled.
And a vote for not the most popular pick of your of the party that most appeals to your views is a vote against you.
Right.
Which I mean, it's what it is, but it has created a very problematic situation for both the U.S. and Puerto Rico, because people, they find a lack of possibility to be heard.
Right. That's why the political systems, not just in Puerto Rico, but also in the United States, are getting very polarized.
Yeah.
Because there's just no middle ground. There's no third option either. It's like if conservatives want a conservative government, they need to vote for the Republican. Yeah. Or, for example, they need to vote for Donald Trump if they feel like there's no other option. That's bad.
They feel like they're left with no choice, and
the same thing happens in Puerto Rico.
Yeah.
So basically, I think ultimately it comes down to rights. Puerto Rican people want more rights. And I joke about this a lot here on campus. A lot of my friends can testify to this. But I joke a lot about how I really want to vote for president, because Puerto Ricans can vote in the continental U.S. There's a couple hoops we need to jump through. Like, I think I'm going to try and vote in these upcoming elections, but I think I need an Indiana-issued ID or something like that. We can't vote. Like, Puerto Ricans get a president. They can't vote for a president in Puerto Rico.
Yeah. And it's interesting because we can't... we do participate in primary voting, in voting in the primaries, but after the primary stage of the presidential election, our voice disappears. And it's very frustrating to a lot of people on the island, because the president does make a lot of choices that influence Puerto Rico, especially with the system they've set in now. There's Obama put in place a fiscal oversight board, which sort of manages air quotes.
There's a lot of controversy on that too, because again, like, I guess it's an important point to make. We did ask for the board.
Yeah.
And like, for example, some people think it's like, I don't think it's very efficient what the board's doing, but I do think it's necessary because we can't handle our own finances.
I'd say something similar is necessary, but in specifics, how the board is now, I feel like that's fair. It's counterproductive.
There's a lot of backlash on like how much the board members make, like income wise, and the fact that Puerto Rico has to pay for that.
Who the board members are.
It's kind of ironic because Puerto Rico is like basically, so the reason why Puerto Rico has a very big debt crisis too is because we can't file for Chapter 9 bankruptcy. Like, for some reason, somewhere along the lines in the paperwork, nobody knows who or why, but people someone didn't put that Puerto Rico has the right to file for Chapter 9. We don't have that. So we're put in a position where we need financial help because we can't handle our finances right now.
Yeah.
And so this board was put in place, but it's kind of hypocritical. Like, some parts of it are, because the board members get paid a lot of money and Puerto Rico has to pay that money, but they're like trying to handle our finances. It's like weird because it's like, well, if we need help with money, why are you like making us pay more money?
Exactly.
Like, I think
and some of their salaries are, like, a lot of citizens would consider ridiculous,
right?
In amount, especially with knowing things such as the minimum wage in Puerto Rico being $7.25, I believe it is, and there's a lot of current tensions on the island with facts like these. They're saying, why is our money going into this if we can barely make money? Or there's a lot of taxation as well that they believe is unjust.
Right. As we also don't have representation in Congress. We have a resident commissioner, but they don't have any voting power in the committees that they're in, and this not only goes for Puerto Rico but all the other territories too.
I think it's American Samoa,
Guam, American Samoa, and the Virgin Islands.
That's it.
And then there's like the Mariana Islands, I think, but I don't think anyone lives in those. But for like the other ones mentioned, it's the same. A lot of them have delegates. I think we're the only one that has a resident commissioner.
But something that's important to note is that none of them have the population size we have. If you count the population of Puerto Rico and all the people who have migrated outside to the U.S.,
it's crazy.
It's It's larger than I think it was 16 states.
Right.
Or it's a large number.
We
of
also
states.
have a larger GDP than a lot of states.
Yeah.
I think like New Hampshire is one that comes to mind just because I remember when I looked it up. So yeah, there's a lot more in this conversation to be said about our current problems and future, how do we go to solve them. Unfortunately, we're currently counting at 59 minutes and 25 seconds, so we're probably going to save that for another episode just because I don't want the podcast to be cut like very abruptly. But yeah, I feel like this episode was more so based on Puerto Rican history.
Yeah, kind of context.
Yeah, a little bit on the statehood versus independence debate.
But it's nice though, because these are things that people should know.
Right, I agree. But now you have context for the next episode. I have 10 seconds left, so this is going to be my outro. Thanks for tuning in. Please tune into the next episode. I'll be having Marcelo back. And yeah, that's been the show. Peace out.